Hi everyone, this is Nick Pollock here from Roar Lions Roar. While you're here, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that alert bell so you never miss any of our new content. And if you prefer to listen instead of watch, make sure you check us out on your podcast platform of choice where you can subscribe and download each new episode. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening. Go State!
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. I'm your host, Bill DeFilippo, and Matt, my co-host, Matt Filippovitz. Matt, this is the second time that we are recording this episode of the podcast because of some audio issues. But before we go, I would like to point something out for our YouTube audience that I noticed just now because I'm paying much closer attention this time.
What'd you notice?
Do you know the phrase, nobody wins unless everybody wins?
Yes, that's correct.
You do. Are you aware that I have that exact same banner at my place?
So, Bill, I got this banner because I know you had the banner, and this is my favorite saying from Springsteen. So this was a birthday gift from my sister. I'm waiting for it to go up in my office at work, but right now, we still don't have set desks. So instead of me having to reserve a desk, all that kind of fun stuff, I'll leave it up here for now. But this will eventually be going in my workplace, but for now it goes in my podcast closet studio.
But funny enough, I also got mine via a birthday gift from my sister. Although she just gave me a gift card to the brand whose name I will not say because they do not sponsor us.
But they could be.
But it's great. Yes, they could. If you would like to sponsor us, company whose name rhymes with Schmockford Pennants, please do. But yeah, Matt, generally, how's it going? How you doing?
It's going good, Bill. I had ramen for the first time this weekend. It was hot as can be, but the place I wanted to go just didn't have a table that was conducive to my group. So I had it with spicy kimchi, fried chicken. I don't know how to use chopsticks, so that was a very humbling experience, but I was committed to learning. And by the end of it, I got 8 noodles on at once. So I'll take that as a win. But so other than that, I'm doing great.
There you go. Yeah, we had a whole riff into a segue that we had when we did this podcast. Tried to do this podcast for the first time, but we won't do that now. And we'll instead just dive right into what we're talking about on the pod today, which is Penn State's offense. This is our preview episode for the Nittany Lion offense. And Matt, if you will indulge me, I'm going to read out some stats from last year's Penn State offense that, as I was doing some homework for this episode of the pod, really did surprise me.
Yeah, hit me.
So Penn State last year was second in the Big Ten in yards per game, fifth in passing yards per game, first in rushing yards per game, and first in points per game. And those really surprised me because on one hand, obviously, when you think of an offense that fires its offensive coordinator midseason, you don't think that it's good. You do not think you are talking about a good unit. And yet, when you look at some of the raw numbers that went into this Penn State football offense, they were 30th nationally in offensive SP+. All of a sudden, you're not as nihilistic about what Penn State's offense was last season.
No, this is if you were to tell me all of those, I would think you're lying about all of them with the exception of scoring. Because even when the offense couldn't get out of second gear, they were consistently putting up 30 points against Illinois, 30 points against Iowa, 31-0, never forget. I think they got close to 40 or may have broken 40 against Northwestern. They really dodged a lot of the middle class of the Big Ten last year. And it kind of shows now that we look back at it that this offense had a lot of really, really good to it. The problem was when the time came to compete against the big dogs, that really, really good tucked its tail between its legs and ran. And that's the frustrating part, that you could see what this offense could function at, and then to watch the complete inability to even try to replicate it against the 3 biggest opponents on the schedule was just maddening to watch. So, I think it's good for us, Bill, to hash this out, because I think you and I can both kind of really take a step back and kind of think the Penn State offense isn't as broken as I feel like we felt at times last year.
Yeah, straight. And obviously, we're going to get to previewing this upcoming offense, but I feel like it's really important to look back on last year, Matt, and basically ask a singular question. And it is a singular question that you have to ask when you have the full body of work, when this particular decision gets made, and everything else that goes into it. And that is, what well, for one, you read all those numbers and you read all those numbers and again, they're kind of misleading. All the numbers were down in the Big Ten a bit at the very top last year, in large part because Ohio State and Michigan weren't like putting up 500 yards and 45 points a game. But I think when you read all those numbers, that does not sound like an offense that fires its offensive coordinator midseason. And yet, when you look at Penn State against Ohio State and against Michigan, against Ohio State, 1 for 16 on third down, 240 yards of total offense, 4.5 yards per pass attempt, 1.9 yards per rush attempt. Against Michigan, 4 for 14 on third down, 238 yards of total offense, 3.2 yards per pass attempt, 4.7 yards per rush attempt. So not nearly as bad. I guess you have to just ask the question, was last year, specifically the performance in those two games, Mike Yurcich's fault? And is the fact that Penn State has a new offensive coordinator installed going to change things? Or were there things about that Penn State offense that bleed into this Penn State's offense that make it so, even though they made a universally agreed upon excellent offensive coordinator hire in Andy Kotelnicki, we still should have some skepticism about them?
So I think it's threefold. I think the issues with Penn State last year offensively were three different either people or entities. Number one, I think, frankly, was Mike Yurcich. And that's tough to swallow. Like, Mike Yurcich was Franklin's hand-picked, I have money to spend on coordinators now guy. Like, he fired Kirk Shiraka after one COVID season to bring in Mike Yurcich. And in year three, his offense looked scared. His offense did not look like it knew what it was doing. His offense lacked rhythm. And Bill, you mentioned this on the pod last week, and I thought it was a really interesting point. And I don't think we talked about it enough last year, but actually, now that I think about it, you mentioned it a good bit. And that's for the entire Franklin era, the focus was on big plays. We want to be explosive. We want to get chunk plays and, be an exciting style of offense that teams are afraid can beat them over the top. And then all of last year, you hear Franklin say, checkdowns are fine. We're on rhythm. We're ahead of the sticks. There's nothing wrong with a 7-minute drive. And it really felt like the antithesis of the last 9 years of James Franklin football. So I think fundamentally, Mike Yurcich's offense was broken. It didn't work. Great, you got him out of there. Part two of this, and I think the second biggest part, Drew Allar's performance. Shaky footwork when he was under duress. An inability to throw on cover one towards the middle of the field, like a flat out refusal a lot of the time. And I get, you could say part of that was that the receivers were not great. You had Theo Johnson, you had Tyler Warren, you had Keandre Lambert-Smith, you had Dante Cephas. I know he didn't know the playbook, but still, there's talent there. Allar was not good enough. I don't think he was nearly as bad as people, seem to believe. Like, again, he led the Big Ten in passing touchdowns. He tied Penn State's best regular season record, like, of the last 30 years as a first-time starter, as a 19-year-old, going to Ohio State and playing the eventual national champion in Michigan. I don't think Allar's a lost cause. I think there's still an NFL first-round talent in that kid. I really do believe that. And then the third part of this is that the receivers just flat out were not good. Like, a lot of turnover there over the past couple of years at position coach. Keandre Lambert-Smith, it sounds like was not great for that room. Trey Wallace constantly being hurt. Nobody else being willing or able to step up. Those three things can kind of all come back to the first one of Mike Yurcich not being good enough at his job. But again, Allar needs to be better. I think Kotelnicki can make him better. The receivers need to be better. I think Julian Fleming and Trey Wallace and Liam Clifford can be leaders in that room and force them to be better. But with that being said, I don't think I can alleviate my concerns with this offense just because Mike Yurcich is no longer, Penn State's offensive coordinator.
Yeah, I feel like going into last season, and it's something we could say with, with hindsight being 2020, there was so much. How do I want to phrase this? There was so much belief in e essentially Drew Allar stepping into being a five-star from day one. Drew Allar being the guy from day one and not realizing that he's a kid and he's learning, he's developing, he's constantly getting better, he's seeing things for the first time, that we thought all these things, the fact that the wide receiver room wasn't especially good, the fact that the offensive coordinator had his flaws, would be covered up because of Drew Allar, because of his pedigree as a recruit, and not the other way around. And that we needed those things, what we as in the Penn State football universe needed to be able to compensate for the fact that Drew is a young guy. Drew still needed his handheld. Drew still needed to go through things that he's never seen or experienced before. And it's interesting because you go through his yardage numbers. Obviously, he comes out and has that huge game against West Virginia. And then you
Gangbusters,
go
man. Bill,
through.
do you remember how you felt watching
Mhm,
that game? Like, I was going through some old text, like cleaning out some storage in my phone. Like, I
mhm,
forgot at the bar I watched the game out last year with friend of the show, Ankit. Some guy brought a trombone. Dude, when you watch
mhm,
a five-star quarterback sling it for like 300 yards and three tutties, and some dude has a
mhm.
trombone, you feel like you feel like you're never gonna die. Like, I felt like Penn State was the team in that moment. And it's crazy how different the vibes are now.
Yeah. And then you go through the rest. Aller played free and cool and confident, and then I have no idea what maybe it just straight up was that Trey Wallace wasn't there. But after 325 yards against WVU, 204 against Delaware, 208 against Illinois, 166 against Iowa, 189 against Northwestern, 162 against UMass, 191 against Ohio State, 210 against Indiana, 240 against Maryland, 70 against Michigan, 79 against Rutgers, 292 against Michigan State, 295 against Ole Miss. He did not exceed 241 yards passing again until the final game of the year. And in that time, they played an FCS team, the worst FBS team, and a whole bunch of not especially good Big Ten teams. And you look at all of that, Matt, and you need your offensive coordinator, you need the players around Drew to be able to help him out. And it just never felt like there was anything helping him kind of get better as a quarterback.
No,
In addition to his struggles, the struggles that he legitimately had, particularly against Ohio State and against Michigan, but also against Illinois when he just really struggled with the fact that Johnny Newton was pressuring him with some level of consistency. Against Northwestern, he did not look like he had an especially good football game. And it was never made easier for him.
no.
So to that extent, I say yes, last season was largely on Mike Yursich, an office coordinator who just did not do a good enough job. But the players were just not good enough. Aller wasn't good enough. The receivers weren't good enough in large part, again, I think because Trey Wallace got hurt. The running backs were not good enough.
No.
It was just a lot of not good enough on Penn State's offense.
The running backs,
And
though, in fairness, I'll give that more towards the scheme than I
sure,
think actually them. But even then, like they did not, when the
sure.
holes were there, I don't think they hit them at the kind of clip that you expected to see.
Yeah, Kaytron Allen seemed like he lacked like a little bit of burst for whatever. I'm not sure what it was, but he didn't seem as explosive
Mhm.
as he was in the past. Penn State's running back room exceeded 100 yards on two occasions. Had a rusher exceed 100 yards on two occasions last year. Kaytron Allen 103 yards against Delaware, and then both guys ran for more than 100 yards against Michigan State. But I read those stats about Nick Singleton, his long carry last year. It's not like Kaytron Allen was breaking off long runs all the time. Yeah, there was just a lot of things, and it seemed like it piled on top of one another. So as we get into the conversation about why is this year going to be different, Matt, my general stance is I need to see it be different before I am ready to say it will be different. What do you say? Are you entering this season with a lot more confidence about Penn State's ability to get the job done in not even just those biggest moments, because those biggest moments are the ones that we're going to spend all our time focusing on and obsessing over and everything.
Right.
Even in the moments where Penn State just did not look good enough last year, what makes you think this year is going to be different?
I think Andy Kotelnicki is a big part of that. I mean, he just seems like such a high energy guy who I just think every time you hear him speak, he comes back to the point that I think his term is that he's an overpaid teacher, I think is kind of what he's called himself. And I think that's a really healthy way to view coaching. Like for him to think his primary job is to teach his guys how to be successful in what they're being taught is a great space to exist in. And again, Bill, I'm the same way. Like a big part of me is, listen, I'll believe it when I see it. I'm not one of those guys who believes Franklin meddles in the offense. Like you look at the Donovan,
No.
you look at the Donovan offense, light years different than the Moorhead offense, Ronnie offense, similar to Moorhead. Again, kind of coached under him. I get it. Soraka offense different, Yurcich offense different. Like I have no reason to believe Franklin meddles. Like that's just football 101. Like if you can't tell Penn State has been different over the years, you're not watching. You're not watching the games.
Andy, just going through Penn State's last 3 offensive coordinators, Kirk Soraka, Mike Yurcich, and now Andy Kotelnicki are not taking this job if they think they don't have the freedom to do the job that they are hired to do, because the coach is going to step in and go, let's call the Drew doesn't see that someone beat the left tackle play. Like it's the no line makes me more pissed off than this one because it is just lazy.
It
takes 2 seconds. Like it is ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. So this is just a long-winded way to say, Bill, essentially, like I feel better about the offense and I have nothing to back it up other than I like guys who can do more with less and who do my favorite phrase in the world, who figure it out. Kansas has no right to win 8 games. He figured it out with that offense. And that's where I think I'm going to plant my flag in for optimism. Because again, I've said on the podcast every August, if you're not optimistic in August, why are you even a fan? Like, I really do think that Andy Kotelnicki can turn around the cursed vibes left by Mike Yurcich and just bring fun back to a Penn State offense that, frankly, needs a lot more fun to, remain competitive for recruiting purposes. We don't really talk about recruiting on this show very often, but like, I don't blame receivers for not wanting to come to Penn State. Like, I totally get it. So I think Andy Kotelnicki is a guy who's done a lot with less and I'm excited to see what he can do with a lot more tools at his disposal.
Yeah, it's a big, like, that is a big source of optimism. A play caller who it's weird. Bill Connolly, I think, had the best tweet on this, and it sums up a lot of what I think the sentiment is on this hire, which is that everyone loved the Mike Yurcich hire and it didn't work. And despite that, everyone loves this hire. Like everyone is, a pessimist will say falling for the same trick again. A more optimistic person will go, oh, they're just real. Like Penn State knocked this one out of the park. They hired a guy who is going to bring a different energy, a different approach to things. You mentioned the overpaid gym teacher line, which is hilarious, especially because like Yurcich seemed like a mad scientist type who wasn't as like gregarious, as open and as fun and as big of a personality as Kotelnicki is.
He seemed like he was treating a game of chutes and ladders like it was chess. I think it's the best way to describe Mike Yurcich.
Yeah. And when you have a guy who is able to kind of encourage the players to play more freely, I think that's a really big thing. And then you look at some of the stuff that he did at Kansas, where he was very good at getting guys in position to take advantage of their skill sets. They were, the way he used motion, the way that he like hunted matchups, the way that he got the defense on the back foot, all these sorts of things are things that we just never saw with Penn State last season. One friend of ours always mentions that Penn State would get to the line of scrimmage and do that check with me nonsense every single play. And it just did not let Drew get into any kind of a rhythm. And, even if there are other reasons for it, it was never that big of a coincidence that on the final drive or so against Ohio State and Michigan, where they're just going out there and they're just playing as quickly as they possibly can, like Drew looked a little bit better, and it's just a little something to hang on to. And I think we underrate how, like, even though it has come up a million times on the 1.5 pods we've done to start this season, Matt, I think we underrate how important having a guy like Trey Wallace is going to be. Like having, you look at the receiver room last year, Keandre Lambert-Smith, I'll have a quote or two about the receiver room last year that I don't think necessarily reflects all that well on him. But Dante Cephas was the number 2 option. There were just too many times when he got taken completely out of games or didn't seem like he was on the same page as Drew Allar. Trey Wallace ends up getting hurt. A bunch of other guys below them just don't have what it takes or didn't have what it takes at that point in their developmental curve to help Penn State. And all of a sudden, Drew's there without a guy who he knows he could just throw the football to and they can go save his ass. How many times in the college football over the years have we seen a quarterback go, I just need to throw the ball down the field. My guy's going to go get it. And early reports out of camp are that Trey Wallace is carrying himself and performing like that kind of guy. And if Penn State has that kind of guy, that opens up so much for Drew, for the rest of the receiver room, for the tight ends, for the running backs, all these sorts of things that they just could not take advantage of last year because they were daring Keandre Lambert-Smith to beat their best cornerback, and it just did not happen nearly enough. So generally, I need to see it before I believe it, but again, it's a point that I made on the last pod, Matt. Like, you look at like the underlying numbers, you look at all these sorts of things. Penn State is in a very similar spot as it was in last year.
Mm-hmm.
And even just a minor vibe course correction, I feel like can go a very long way.
I think it's hard for Bill. I think you and I are both kind of struggling to find the words for how to describe what last year was to us. And I think a lot of people are probably in the same boat, especially, in light of all those stats you rattled off to kick off the show. I think the best way I can sum this up is that the Penn State offense last year was abundantly cursed for reasons that I think can be exercised fairly early on with a simple vibe change. The talent in this room, in that offensive room, is abundant. It sucks you lose Olu. It sucks you lose Caden Wallace. It sucks you lose Theo. That's, I think, the guys that you're gonna miss from the offense from last year. And if the guys that you're missing, from your offense last year, the biggest guys, if, Olu's huge, that's a big loss. Caden's a big loss. But like if your third biggest guy was a day 3 pick in the NFL draft, like odds are you got a lot of talent back. Like I really just think that it's hard to put into words how disappointing the offense really was, because I think that it just was. Like it just wasn't, Mike Yurcich just wasn't built for this. And that's just what it was. He just wasn't ready for this. And when one thing went wrong, everything started to go wrong. And I think that you calling out Trey Wallace as like kind of the glue that held this thing together through West Virginia is an interesting point that I hadn't considered. Bill, Allar looked so much different without Trey Wallace in that game. And there's kind of an immediate, through line between Wallace's unavailability and Allar's, kind of immediate struggles after that West Virginia game. So I'm curious to see if his return to the lineup, knock on wood, he stays healthy throughout the course of this preseason. But if he's back in, sign me back up for thinking that this offense can be fun again.
Yeah. And we're going to go position by position in just 1 second with Penn State's offense and talk through Drew, Nick Singleton. You put the name to the position. You're a Penn State fan. You know how this works. But before we do that, we want to take a minute to thank our sponsor, Home Field Apparel. Been with us from day one, being podcast only. They've been nothing but great to us. Like there is nothing like having a partner in all of this that has been there from the very beginning. Unfortunately, Home Field Apparel has been that for us. And from basically day one, They've been great to Penn State fans ever since they first got Penn State as part of their collection of schools, which I've lost count of how many schools they actually have at this point. They have a little bit of everything that you could possibly want in the apparel game. I'm currently wearing a Home Field Apparel Happy Valley t-shirt, one of my favorite t-shirts in their collection, one of my favorite t-shirts in my closet. And speaking of home field stuff and being in my collection, they just dropped these incredible preseason kickoff boxes with exclusive gear. I was able to get my hand on one. I can't wait to see what it looks like. And I even if they were not sponsoring us, I would love everything that Home Field Apparel has in its locker for Penn State fans, for fans of other schools. They make great gifts. They make great additions to your closet, into your wardrobe. Anything and everything Home Field Apparel is going to be there for you as a college sports fan. Of course, this is the part where I read the promo code out. If you have never purchased anything from Home Field Apparel, you can use the promo code RLR24 for 15% off of your first order. Again, use the promo code RLR24 for 15% off of your first order. Thank you again to Home Field Apparel for sponsoring the pod. Thank you always to Home Field Apparel for sponsoring the pod. Let's continue with this episode of the podcast, and Matt, we'll do that by going position by position with Penn State's offense. And I think the only place to start is a quarterback.
Book is closed. Book is closed on 2023 and Mike Yurcich. Mm-hmm. Demons are gone. Let's ride. Let's ride.
And here's my general thing with the quarterback room. Everything that we've talked about with how good Trey Wallace can be and how important Trey Wallace can be, with how important a new offensive coordinator can be, all these things, how promising talent of the tight end room is, how they're got, more promising guys at receiver than last year, how good the running backs are. None of these things matter in terms of Penn State seriously competing for anything if Drew is not that guy. That is my general thesis on Penn State football this season. Either Drew is that guy and Penn State has a shot to do some special things, or Drew is not that guy and we're just kind of throwing our hands in the air waiting for this season to come to an end.
Bill, you've talked a lot about, just maybe not even on the pod, you've never had this take. Maybe it might have been just to us in our Slack. But you often compared the way Allar played football last year in contrast to how Josh Allen plays football. If folks will remember, Allar's comp coming out of high school, I think by 24/7 Sports, or it may have been on 3, I apologize, I don't remember offhand, was Josh Allen. Big dude, can weirdly run better than you would expect, huge arm talent, has all of the physical traits you want of a quarterback. Mm-hmm. The problem is he didn't play like Josh Allen. Sean Clifford played like Josh Allen. The problem is when you're Sean Clifford and you play like Josh Allen, those turnover plays that you generate are not offset by these generational throws and plays you're able to make. Allar, if he can go out there and play with that Sean Clifford fearlessness of turning the ball over, it's going to happen. Deal with it. Trust your defense. And he can then go out there and that gives him the confidence to make those, I can throw this 60-yard laser. I think that is going to unlock a whole new level for Drew Allar. And I think a lot of NFL scouts will fall in love with that version of Drew Allar. And if that guy exists, and I think he does, I really do think that if Andy Kotelnicki and James Franklin and Danny O'Brien can get Allar where he needs to be mentally, I think Allar has a shot to be one of the first names heard in the draft in April, as early as this year.
So here's the fleshed out version of what I've been saying with Josh Allen. Everyone acts like Josh Allen's issues with turnovers, with fumbles, and with interceptions are like this gigantic problem. The Buffalo Bills are doomed because Josh Allen turns the ball over too much. That's getting a little carried away with it. But his turnovers are such a big issue that it is limiting to the Buffalo Bills. Last season, Josh Allen had 25 combined fumbles and interceptions. Okay? Despite that, the Bills were third in offensive DVOA. They went 11-6 on the season. They scored the third most points in the AFC. They were the 2 seed in the division. And they fired their offensive coordinator during the year because they just didn't think it was good enough. And Allen specifically had 44 total touchdowns, 4,306 passing yards, completed 66.5% of his completions, and ran the ball for 524 yards. So I say all that to say this. There was this weird belief that Drew Allar turning the ball over, obviously, again, you would prefer your quarterback does not turn the ball over. But when you have a guy who is capable of executing those kind of high risk, high reward plays, and maybe Drew isn't. Maybe Drew is just not capable of executing those kind of high risk, high reward plays. But when you do, you take a couple of those bad things because of what good things they end up doing. And you take solace in knowing that if you turn the ball over, you have an elite defense on the other side that the other team then has to deal with. Those 25 fumbles and interceptions over the course of an 18-game NFL season is less than 1.5 a game. That is a lot, 1.5 a game, and you're only giving the other team an extra possession. Like, it's not as big of a deal as it felt like it was made out to be. It was not as big of a deal as it seemed like Drew dealt with last year.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, I feel like we saw a guy who went out there so terrified of making mistakes. You know, there was the line that Drew needs to throw an interception to see it's not the end of the world. He threw an interception, came back, throws that strike against Indiana, has a good game against Maryland, and then 70 yards against Michigan, 79 against Rutgers. Like, he threw an interception. He saw it wasn't the end, because I think it was just like such a big talking point and such a big issue for him. And so, like, he was so risk averse to his own detriment. And he's talked a lot, Matt, about his confidence this offseason and the need to be confident and how confidence is important, how he's feeling more confident and blah, 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 and the coaching staff is making him more confident, all these sorts of things. He seems like a guy who just who needs to have a little bit more of that Sean Clifford, I say Trace McSorley or Matt McGloin mentality of like, I'm the biggest dog in this yard. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to get the job done. And again, if he doesn't have that, if he's not able in his second year as a starter, which is something I think is going to be really big for him, if he doesn't have that, I just have a lot of pessimism about what this Penn State offense can achieve.
Even if he doesn't have that, like, you know, big dog in the park kind of mentality, this team can still win 10 games. Like, I feel confident in that. But again, like, you don't get too many 5 stars in Happy Valley at quarterback. Like, I get at this point what he was as a recruit doesn't really matter, but optics wise, yeah, like, dude, let's rock. Like, figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
Find a way to play to your strengths. Excuse me. And that's on Danny O'Brien and Andy Kotelnicki to get him there. So if he can be that, I think Drew can be the best quarterback in the Big Ten this year. I think, you know, the Big Ten quarterbacks don't really scare me all that much. And I think there's a great opportunity for Allar to go out there and grab that QB1 spot in this 18-team conference now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I will almost certainly put Dylan Gabriel ahead of him, but like, it's still right there for Drew.
6th year Dylan Gabriel versus 3rd year Allar, though. It's like,
yeah, exactly. Like, he's been at this for 6 years. He's seen everything. He's in a much, like, I think Oregon might be the best team in the best offense in the Big Ten. Like, the infrastructure around him is, you know, next to as good as it's going to get. Neither here nor there. We'll say that for another time. Other guy I think it's important to mention here is Bo Pribula. I mean, Matt, you and I have mentioned on this pod before that James Franklin very clearly wanted more Bo Pribula last year.
We all did.
And Mike Yurcich didn't give him enough Bo Pribula. And now Andy Kotelnicki is an offense coordinator whose offense in theory fits Bo Pribula better. In theory, fits Bo Pribula better. But more importantly, he's an offense coordinator who has shown some real understanding of how to get 2 quarterbacks on the field over the course of a football game. So I'm really optimistic about what we're going to see out of Bo Pribula and how he's integrated into the offense. I'm also like, I'm not expecting him to like seriously challenge Drew for the starting job unless Drew completely falls apart or anything like that.
No.
But I think as much as I don't love, and this has been a thing of mine going back to the Tommy Stevens days, as much as I don't love taking a skill position player off to put another quarterback on the field. At least Andy Kotelnicki seems like an offense coordinator who knows how to cook up ways to make that make sense.
Yeah. Bo's got to throw better. I think that's beyond fair to say. Like, he hit some good darts this year in his limited opportunities. That Trey Potts throw against Northwestern was a good ball. But again, that's like the biggest one I can think of. And again, I know he didn't get a lot of opportunities when he was in. Dude can scoot. Like, dude can move. I think there's no denying that. And I'm excited to see what that looks like. But if he's going to be the best version of himself, he needs to make teams respect his ability to throw. Bill, 3 snaps a game with the Bo Prabula package. Sound about right?
I'm not. Well, my issue with putting a number on it is that if Bo is really in a groove, if the defense is really having trouble
that's a good
dealing
point.
with it,
Damn, that's a great point.
10, 15, 20 snap, it's not like they, Drew doesn't seem to me, maybe I'm wrong, like the kind of super sensitive dude who would really hate being on the coming off the field because another player is really feeling it, in large part because I assume he was told and has been told over the years, hey, we're going to give Bo playing time. But I've been wrong before, so who knows?
Yeah.
Running backs, is there anything at all that we need to say about Penn State's running back room?
They're good. Repeat my phrase from last week. Get the fuck out of their way.
Yeah, man. I mean, Nick Singleton, it is a shame what happened with how Nick Singleton's year went last year. I definitely think, and this is a point that James Franklin raised, and it's something I completely agree with. He did become a better all-around football player.
100%.
His comfort as a receiver,
night and day.
He was considerably more comfortable as a receiver, considerably better in pass protection. That stuff is important, but the bread and butter of running the football was not as he was really good at getting to that first guy, very bad at making that first guy miss. And one thing I think Andy Kotelnicki is going to do a lot of and should do a lot of is cook up ways to get Singleton the ball when he's already moving instead of, inside zone and Drew dropping back to pass and oh God, I'm just going to dump it off to Nick and make him do something. They're going to cook up better ways to get Nick Singleton the football. And I think Nick Singleton could be in for a monster year. And then Kaytron Allen, steady Eddie, as long as he keeps falling forward for 5.5 to 6 yards, I'm going to be happy. The more interesting part of this running back room,
wait, Bill, can I hit on one thing with the running backs with those two guys?
Go ahead. Yeah.
2017, Saquon Barkley's phenomenal season, his final one in Happy Valley. How many balls did he catch?
I looked it up last week. Wasn't it 25, 30, something like that?
54.
54. Oh, I was looking up 2016. Okay, yeah.
2017, 54, which was tied with Juwan Johnson, and Juwan Johnson led the receivers. Right. And it was only one ahead of Deshaun Hamilton. I think we're going to see a return to Kaytron Allen and Nick Singleton being a pivotal part of this passing game. And I think they need to be, especially if the Penn State receivers are not immediately ready to take that step early on. Kaytron Allen, Nick Singleton, get them the ball in space. I think they're going to be a humongous part of that receiving game early on.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is what is behind the two. Those two are so rock solid that I'm not worried about them, in the slightest.
It's a scheme thing with them that's going to hold them back. Their talent will hold them back. It's the scheme. Sorry, Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, and then behind them you have the ultra promising freshman running back Quentin Martin from Belle Vernon, Pennsylvania, and the redshirt freshman Cameron Wallace, who is known as has a reputation for being a really big time burner, was a relatively lowly regarded 3-star recruit who Penn State fell in love with and said, "Hey, we need you on the roster."
Sounds like Journey Brown.
Sounds like Journey Brown, absolutely. I don't really have any major expectations or hopes or aspirations or anything for them this year, just because the two guys ahead of them are that good. But I think that Singleton and Allen are so good that they can help Penn State be in situations where you know what? Let's give Cam 5 snaps. Let's give Quentin 5. Let's give them a series. Let's give them a drive. Let's give them whatever, because we know when the going gets tough, we have Nick, we have Kaytron, we're going to be fine. And that pays off down the road. Like, I view both of them as guys who they'll get a couple of opportunities. I mean, last year, Trey Potts ran the ball 25 times, had 4 receptions on the year, played a little bit. But I'm certainly not sitting here thinking like, all right, Quentin Martin or Cam Wallace, one of them is going to be a freshman All-American.
No, and that's great. Like, they don't have to be. I think Quentin Martin's not going to redshirt. He's going to get in the field. He can catch the ball too well, I think, to stay on the sideline. And I think the way Penn State handles RB3 has to be different than how they handled it last year, because you want to make sure Singleton and Allen can hold up to a potential 17-game season. You want to make sure you protect their draft stock, because that's good for recruiting, especially in blowouts. And you want to make sure that you get some seasoning on Cam Wallace and Quentin Martin. Like, it's not like it's fifth year Trey Potts, who's probably gone. Like, this is now becoming developmental reps in a game setting. And those are invaluable for a young running back. So I think you're going to see a lot of those two guys. Not even late in games. I think I wouldn't be shocked at all if they get in, first, second quarter more often than not.
Yeah, and there's been, especially with Martin, a lot of hype and promise about what he can achieve. There have been fans who want to see him move to receiver because of his comfort catching the football. And like, if you can have him as an option out of the backfield with some level of comfort coming out of the backfield, and the speed and the physicality of the game aren't too much for him, like, yeah, that kid's going to get on the field and he's going to do some really impressive things this year and down the road for Penn State football. Wide receiver. Penn State's much maligned wide receiver room. Can I read a couple of quotes for you, Matt?
Hit me.
I'm not going to do that. I'm going to read you some quotes. First off, I'm going to read you one from auburntigers.com on August 9th, 2024. Coming from a run-first offense. Yes.
Wow.
Coming from a run-first offense, the receivers might not have always had the same confidence that I was used to, Lambert Smith said. Now you come here and you're in a situation where Coach Freeze, who's known for throwing the ball and getting playmakers open, you've got a lot of guys in the offensive staff who take pride in throwing the ball. That just already gives you a different sense of confidence. Another quote from the story in the aftermath of some praise he got from their quarterback, noted former Michigan State quarterback Peyton Thorne. Obviously, it makes me feel good. That's kind of what I expected. In 4 years in college, I still haven't shown what my game is capable of and playing to my strengths. And now some quotes via our pal Sean Fitz at BWI. These are not behind a paywall, so I don't feel bad about it. Talking about the wide receivers. I would say really the main thing I've noticed is that I feel like this is the closest room has ever been, said senior wideout Liam Clifford. It's a super close team. Throughout the offseason, we always were trying to find ways, even away from football, just off the field, get together and hang out and get to know each other. That stuff's really important. We need to be able to trust those guys when you're on the field, and that starts off the field. But I think it's a hard-working room, and it's extremely competitive, just like it was last year, just like it's been really ever since I've been here. It's a competitive room, and that's what you need. You need guys to be competitive. You need guys to push each other, and that ultimately makes everybody grow. And now one final quote. There's a different confidence in that room, said Pribula. I think that stems from the guys being a little older and the guys being unselfish, but also Julian coming in as an older guy from a different school, bringing some of the culture that he learned from his past school, bringing that into our room and letting our guys kind of see that. I think that's helped a lot. So basically, Keandre Lambert Smith thinks that he's never been given a really good chance, and everyone in Penn State's wide receiver room thinks that the vibes are much better and there's confidence and maturity and unselfishness issues. So, yeah, what do you think?
I'm not gonna trash Keandre Lambert Smith.
Yeah.
It is what it is.
Just to be clear, I'm not trying to trash Keandre Lambert Smith. I am saying that
the vibes are
different. It's very clear there was some not being on the same page in the room last year. I think it's something that we've said before. It didn't necessarily reflect well on Keandre. I don't think that when Julian Fleming came in, everyone talked about him bringing a different culture and mindset and all these sorts of things. And now you hear these quotes flying around, and there's just something different about this wide receiver. Not necessarily related to one guy, but just something different to how this wide receiver room operates.
Yeah. So I said it last week, and I said it on another podcast I did this summer. The biggest thing Julian Fleming can bring for Penn State this fall is be a guy who cut his teeth in the best receiver room in the country and bring that energy to Penn State. Check. Feels like that box is pretty much checked at this point. Now it's on the guys in that room to take to that culture and want to be like the room that developed Chris Olave, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Garrett Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Egbuka. Like, yeah, I would want a guy who, held his own in that room in my roster and kind of bringing that culture to State College. The receivers, Bill, I think we have to bunch them. I think Trey Wallace is a pro. Stay healthy. Stop breaking your collarbone. Stay healthy. Stay on the field. I believe he can be a wide receiver 1 and the ultimate security blanket for Drew Allar. Tier 2, Liam Clifford, Julian Fleming. Liam Clifford is not sneaky athletic. Liam Clifford is not sneaky fast. Liam Clifford is not more quick than fast. Liam Clifford is.
Do you think he's a real coach's kid, a real first one in, last one to leave, a real lunch pail kind of guy?
Listen, I don't know. I wonder how much of Limitless, whatever it was called, NIL, Liam owns, because I know he partnered with it. Liam is a legitimately good wide receiver. Like, don't belittle him with this, like, oh my God, he can be Danny Amendola. Like, that's disrespectful to Liam Clifford. I think he can actually play. And I think he's going to play a lot. And I think he's going to beat guys with his flat out speed sometimes. And it's going to be fun. And then I'll put Julian Fleming in there too. Just a guy who, big bodied, he can get open. He's going to catch the football. I'm really hopeful he can just stay healthy. And I think it's those 3. And then it's Amari Evans and Caden Saunders, who it is the money year. Prove it. I think Amari Evans can be a humongous part of this offense if the staff gets him the ball in scenarios where he's successful, or where he can be successful. And it's on Amari for when that's not the case to use his 4.3 speed and go out there and get a couple extra yards. So those are I think the big 5 in that room, Bill. I think you're in the same boat as me on that front.
Generally, the comparison that I am going to make for Penn State is to the 2012 offense, where Allen Robinson, 77 receptions, 1,018 yards, 11 touchdowns. The next top receiver was a tight end in Kyle Carter, 36 receptions, 453 yards, 2 touchdowns. The next top wide receiving option was Brandon Felder, 31, 437 and 1. I don't think that Trey Wallace is going to be as good as Allen Robinson. I'm not saying he's going to go for 70 plus receptions, 1,000 plus yards, and 10 plus touchdowns. What I am saying is I think the breakdown is going to be very slanted in the wide receiver room towards one guy, and the rest is going to be made up by, maybe a tight end here, a wide receiver there, whatever that's going to look like. And when it comes to how I think this room is going to function, I think they're going to give a whole lot of opportunities, a whole lot of targets to Trey Wallace just because he is that guy.
Yep.
And even last year, they talked about him like he was that guy. And then whatever you can get, whatever a guy like Liam Clifford brings to the table, whatever a guy like Julian Fleming brings to a table, whatever a guy like Amari Evans brings to the table, even if you go farther down to a Caden Saunders, to an Anthony Ivy, to one of the freshmen who they've brought into the program, it's less about asking them to do anything and everything, but it's more about being able to just focus on the stuff that they are good at. And if you just focus on the stuff that they are good at, with Julian Fleming, that is, he's a very good run blocker. And he's not exactly a yards after catch guy, but he'll do the dirty work. And if you need 8 yards, he will get you 9.5. If with Amari Evans, it's taking the top off of the defense. With guys like Liam Clifford, Tysier Denmark, Peter Gonzalez, going through all those extra dudes, it's just, don't ask Liam Clifford to be the guy who completely takes the top off the defense. But if he's a really good route runner and he's a guy who can run himself open and has a reliable pair of hands, you're asking him to focus entirely on that. And I think when you have a guy at the very top of the room like Trey Wallace, it becomes a lot easier to do all of those things. And if that happens, everything else just inherently falls into place, Matt. He just has to stay healthy. And if Trey Wallace stays healthy, I think that takes care of a lot of stuff for Penn State.
Who's your pick for wide receiver 2?
I will say Liam
I'm with
Clifford.
you on that. Yep.
I think his experience within the program, 6'1", 205 pounds, he's a really solidly built dude. Uh, you well, I'm not expecting him. I don't want to say I think he's an NFL guy. I don't think he's an NFL guy. I think I don't know what he is, but I know he is a guy who has been here long enough that I can rely on him.
Mhm.
The guy who really interests me is Omari Evans, because that's just not something Penn State's offense had enough of last year, which is a guy who has a singular skill that you cannot teach in game-breaking speed. And if they could take advantage of that, go back to the long throw against Michigan State, that is a huge boost. That is a thing that the offense needed last year. And if they can get that, awesome.
One last guy I'll ask you about directly. Tysier Denmark. Malik McLean, 2023. A fair stat line for him. I'm not saying he's going to have the case of the dropsies like that, but that feels about right. Like wide receiver 6 in terms of impact.
I don't want to put anything on a true freshman who just got
fair.
here.
Get it.
He's
not going to be the savior if somebody's looking for the savior, this wide receiver room, to come from a freshman. It's not going to be Tysier Denmark. It's not going to be any of those guys.
Yeah, I can't remember when or where it came up. Let me look at what Matt said. But Matt basically had a line where it was like, if he puts up numbers XYZ, people would be disappointed with the hype that he's starting to get. And then Matt went and looked, and numbers XYZ were all like markedly better than what Jahan Dotson did as a freshman.
Yeah.
So like, it's very easy. Okay, here we go.
This is Evil Matt who said this, not me, right?
Yes, other Matt. There's so much hype that if he only has 20 for 350 and a couple of scores, that'll be a disappointment. And then Matt said that's 50% more production than Jahan Dotson had as a freshman. So I'm not putting anything on him, on Peter Gonzalez. They're brand new to this. This is such a different existence from being a high school athlete. Mm-hmm. Anything that Penn State gets out of them, great. If Penn State doesn't get anything out of them, totally fine.
Agreed.
Tight ends. It's another room where I don't know if there are any big concerns or issues, Matt. It's in a really healthy place, which I think is great, where it has the top guy in Tyler Warren. It has a guy right behind him in Khalil Dinkins, who has played a lot of football and they clearly trust to one extent or another. And then they have young, talented guys in Joey Schlafer, and Luke Reynolds, and Andrew Rappelier, who they can bring along as quickly or as slowly as they want because they have that luxury. There is not a single thing there I think there is to say about this tight end room other than they're really good. Tyler Warren's going to put up numbers this year as long as he can get over his case of the drop.
First overall pick.
I was going to give you the floor to do that in a sec. As long as he gets over his case of the drops last year, because drops were an issue with him.
Sure.
And if Penn State is able to take advantage of that, having that safety blanket for Drew, especially as, for how excited I am for the wide receiver room, they kind of get through, figure things out the first couple of weeks, survive against West Virginia, then Bowling Green, Kent State, Illinois, UCLA, all at home. I think having a tight end room with guys that Drew knows and trusts and the coaching staff knows and trusts, huge.
Tyler Warren, first overall. I feel really good about him cementing himself as a day 2 pick in the NFL draft this coming year. Khalil Dinkins, guy caught passes on fourth down a lot. Like, a lot of his production came late downs. Automatic trust, I think, built there. Andrew Rappelier, prep school guy, so a year older than his grade would indicate. I think very physically developed. I think he can block. I think he's going to have a bigger role. Andy Kotelnicki used a lot of 3 tight end sets at Kansas. I think we see a lot of that here. Joey Schlafer, skinny receiver for a lot of high school. Keep developing. Luke Reynolds, if you need him, great. I think it'd be cool to see him, come on the field right away as a true freshman. But at the end of the day, I don't really think you need to take a speedster like Omari Evans off for Luke Reynolds. So that's That's my take on that room. Shout out to Ty Howell, man. That's a hell of a job.
Yeah, it's funny because like Ty Howell just kind of got dropped into that. That's never been a room where it's felt like, they've placed like a crazy emphasis on having the best possible coach, and then Ty Howell steps, even with Penn State having a good tight ends coaches over the years, and then Howell steps in, does an unbelievable job, gets the co-offense coordinator title last year when aftermath of Yurcich getting fired, and it's deserved. I mean, they've been doing some really great things. They're going to continue to do some really great things this year and down the road. I hope we get a ton of Andrew Rappelier, Luke Reynolds, and Joey Schlafer this year. Talented dudes. You don't need to really put a ton of tread on Tyler Warren's tires. And, if you're able to put yourself in a better position in 2025 because you were in a really good spot in 2024, great. Little more concerned. Matt, I want to go as far as to say that Penn State's offensive line, I think it's a real testament to how good Phil Troutline is at his job that Penn State fans aren't more nervous about the offensive line going into the season, because they lost some real talent last year. At three starters off the line are no longer with the team. They are all in the NFL right now. And a lot of question marks should be there. But I feel like, just in talking to Penn State fans, in a major shift from how James Franklin teams went earlier in his tenure,
kidding.
there's a lot of, yeah, they're talented. They have a good coach. We think they'll figure things out.
There's a floor here, finally. Like, there's a floor here that I think a lot of us have come to terms with. Left to right, Bill, I'm just going to rattle off my projected starters, if you're cool with it. Left tackle,
Go ahead.
Drew Shelton. Left guard, Vega Ioane. Center, Nick Dawkins. Right guard, Sal Wormley. Right tackle, Anthony Donko, or, I'm a coward, Nolan Rucci. I think that gets the or designation. Because, again, as good as Donko was, we saw him play like 38 snaps of football in a bowl game as a true freshman. Like, I think he can be great. Not ready to crown him, first round pick just yet. There's a floor here. There's depth in that room with guys like Javen Williams, with guys like JB Nelson, Cooper Cousins, whoever doesn't start that given week in the Donko Rucci platoon, I expect. I think there's 9 guys who can play. I think even if one guy goes down, like if Dawkins goes down, you slide Vega over to center, you put JB Nelson, a starter for you last year, right back in there. There is definitely a lower ceiling with this group without Olu and without Hunter Norzad and without Caden Wallace. But I think the floor has been raised to a level we would have been clamoring for 5 years ago. And I never, there was a game, Bill, I think it was the 2014 Ohio State game, where Ohio State's punter had Penn State like in the tickle chamber the entire game. And Chris Gula, the punter at the time, just couldn't do anything. And in that moment, I'm like, I will never not admire a certain floor for punters. And I'm keeping that same energy now all these years later for offensive line. So I think that this is a very talented group. And if there are any shortcomings, which there will be naturally, I trust Andy Kotelnicki to scheme around a lot of it. And that's a good spot to be in.
Yeah, I'm not interested about the interior of the offensive line. JB Nelson, Nick Dawkins, Sal Wormley, and then however Vega Ioane and Cooper Cousins fit into the equation. Like, that's a really good group of guys. Like, I think it says a lot about Nick Dawkins. We know how good JB Nelson is. We know how good Sal Wormley is. And we know how good Vega Ioane is. And they all should get a little bit better now that they're in, Wormley's been here a million years. Nelson's been here forever. Vega's entering year 3, I believe, with the program. I think it says a lot about Nick Dawkins and his ability to be a good center for Penn State football. Obviously, there's the leadership aspect of all of it that he purportedly brings. But it says a lot that Cooper Cousins doesn't, there haven't been reports out of camp that Cooper Cousins is like, right there to take the job away from him, because things have been falling into place for 3 years now for Cooper Cousins to step onto Penn State's campus and become a starter on the offensive line. with how good he is, with how committed he is to Penn State, with how physically developed he is at such a young age. All of that is great, and I'm really optimistic about that. I'm very worried at tackle. A
Which
lot
one?
of this has to do with this. Yes. A lot of this has to do with the fact that our last time seeing Drew Shelton play left tackle didn't go very well in the Peach Bowl. We will see what he ends up looking like with a full camp, with the knowledge that it's his job and he's not there to like step in and spell Olufashinu, but he did a nice
And
job
without the injury he
when he
had
got forced into,
for a lot of
and
last year.
without the injury
Yeah.
he was carrying, yes. But he did a nice job when he was forced into action as a true freshman, relative to expectations. He'll get, right away, he will have to be the starting left tackle in a hostile road environment. So we're going to learn a lot about him from the rip. Anthony Donko had a very good bowl game. No one will see what happens when he actually has to be a starting caliber football player as opposed to a guy who flashed and surprised in a bowl. And then Nolan Rucci is a guy who there's a lot about Nolan Rucci that is weird. The number one recruit in PA, a 5-star offensive tackle. He also barely was able to get over 300 pounds and was dealing with a constant revolving door of offensive line coaches in Wisconsin. He's at a place where he is just now receiving some level of stability in what he is learning and is physically growing into his body in the way that you would want. I almost wonder if Nolan Rucci is a year or two behind in his development because of Wisconsin, which is not something you would expect out of an offensive lineman. So,
And it sucks because it's year 4 for him already.
Yeah.
Like, he has no COVID year.
Yeah.
He has 2 years left. That sucks.
Yeah, it does. So those tackles are going to be probably more than any position other than Drew, other than watching the quarterback. I'm going to be watching really closely as we head into the West Virginia game because, I think Penn State's going to be fine along the offensive line, Matt. And again, that's a reflection of Phil Trautwein. I don't know how confident I am that they are going to be a unit that just keeps Drew upright all the time.
Yes. We didn't really talk about this, but Allar can run better than I think he gets credit for. He had like 200 yards rushing last year. I think he has some escapability to him. But yes, I think that edge rushers could have themselves some solid draft tape based upon what we know right now on August 13th about these Penn State tackles. Not saying that's going to be the case. Our opinion could change in 21 days, after the West Virginia game.
Mm-hmm.
But as of right now, Bill, I think it's a very fair concern. And the Shelton thing is tough because he was really good for a freshman. But again, that caveat for a freshman, it's junior year now. Now it's time to see if he can be a true Sunday player. And I'm curious to see how that develops. And I'm curious to see how Javen Williams, a former 5-star himself, pushes for that job if he's able to truly develop as a pass blocker after only 1 year because he ran like the wing tee in high school.
Yeah. Funny enough, James Franklin is meeting with the media right now, and he just called Harrison Wallace and Liam Clifford the biggest difference on offense this preseason and has praised them for their camp. So, unfortunately, James couldn't have said that 15 goddamn minutes ago when we were still talking about them.
First, he declines our podcast invite, then he does this to us. What a bummer.
Yeah. He also, more relevant to the conversation we're having right now, will likely have more than 2 offensive tackles play as things get underway and more than 2 centers. Cooper Cousins playing at guard and center. So pretty interesting. We will see what happens with those various positions as the years go on. As the year goes on. Matt, let's wrap up this pod by just doing our general expectations for the offense. And would you mind if I read one more quote before you give yours?
Go for it.
It's more even than it's been in the past, Franklin said. What I would say is we're still inconsistent with that, where in terms of, to me, it should come down to like 1 or 2 reps in every period who wins. And we have that. But then we have other days where the defense dominates a period. Then we'll have other days where the offense dominates a period. And when I talk to the guys, and what I talk to the guys about is we can't have a bad quarter on offense or a bad quarter on defense. We got to make sure for games that we want to win, we got to play really well in all 3 phases. So it's more competitive than it's been in terms of the score, and we keep score. Every single day we put it up there. We track explosive plays, we track turnovers, and then we track competitive periods and who won the periods. And I want to say it's been tied more than it hasn't been. And I say all of that to say this, Matt. As we're setting expectations for Penn State's offense, I think we all agree or can get on board with Penn State's defense being a very good unit. If Penn State's offense is capable of taking it to them, the second best defense that they are going to face this season, or maybe even the best defense that they're going to face this season, I'd probably put Ohio State number one, but if you want to say Penn State, whatever, I think that's a really good sign.
I apologize to the YouTube viewers for not looking at the camera right now, but Bill, I know you shared the SP Plus projections earlier today with us for what Penn State has. They're projected 24th, so 35.8 points per game is where they're sitting at right now. My expectation here, Bill, is I think this will be a top 20 unit in the country. I think there's enough pieces here, and I think the man at the helm of this offense is good enough to get them to top 20 status. I think that's the floor. Ceiling, who knows? But I think this team can be top 20 offense good. I think Allar is a good enough quarterback. I think the running backs are good enough. I think the receivers have just enough to get them over that hump. I think the offensive line has enough depth to where the cream is going to rise to or what's the term? Oh my God. Is it cream rises to the top?
Cream rises to the top.
Is that it?
Yes.
Cream of the crop, cream to the top, whatever. Interesting.
Well, the cream rises to the top was a Macho Man Randy Savage line. So just keep going.
It's an hour, 5 minutes in. So if you're still listening, thank you. Yeah, Bill, I think this offense can really get the job done. I really like a lot of pieces here. And I think the man in charge, and not to be outdone, Danny O'Brien especially, can do wonders for this room.
I certainly hope so. There are a lot of reasons why I would understand why a Penn State fan is optimistic. There are a lot of reasons why I believe the general consensus would be optimistic about Penn State, but it's a line that I said last week, Matt. Ask me again after the West Virginia game, and I will have a much better sense for how I feel about Penn State as a team, largely because by then I will have a much better sense for how I feel about Penn State as an offense. And with that, I think we're done. Any final things you'd like to say before I send the people into their week?
No, I'm going to Gainesville this weekend. I'm excited to see the University of Florida, Florida's campus. Never been. That should be fun. Bill, I have a game for you to close this out. There's a former Penn State coach who is on the Florida staff as an analyst. You get one guess. Who is on Florida's coaching staff who is a former coach at Penn State?
Is that John Donovan?
It's John Donovan, baby. A senior offensive analyst for Billy Napier's Florida Gators.
Thought so. I couldn't remember if it was John Donovan or John Butler, but a little bit of Googling tells me that John Butler is
still with the Saints, maybe?
Still with this. He was most recently with the Bills, so he is currently. Wait, is he in Nebraska now?
Yeah, that was a huge thing.
He's in Nebraska now
with Rule. Yeah.
Okay, good for him. I wish him all the worst. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. Please make sure you subscribe wherever you go and get your podcast, whether that's Apple Podcasts, whether that's Spotify. You name it, we're there. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, please go and leave us a 5-star review. Please go subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you do that, please hop into the comments on YouTube and chop it up with Penn State football fans about whatever's going on in the comments over in YouTube. Just be cool, keep the vibes good, all that. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at RLRblog. And as always, thank you to our sponsor, Home Field Apparel. Again, use the promo code RLR24 for 15% off of your first order. One last time, thank you everyone for listening to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. For Matt Filipovitz, I'm Bill DeFilippo. Take care, everyone.
Bill, 2 last-minute news nuggets. This just in from Sean Fitz. Penn State freshman wide receiver Peter Gonzalez has a not short-term injury and will be out for a while. So take that into account. Sorry to kill the vibes at the end of the podcast. I'm going on a different podcast, Inside the Pylon. Episode should be out tomorrow. I'm talking Penn State. So if you want to hear more of my voice after this hour, go check out those guys. Thank you. Bye.